When it comes to cutting the Triton chambers and putting the access or connecting pipes in from the sides, there's a couple things you should really need to keep in mind. One, make sure you wear gloves, eye protection, and I'd recommend a long sleeve shirt like I'm wearing today. The tools that you're going to need, obviously, is a tape measure, a Sawzall with a bimetal tapered blade. You want the bimetal because this stuff is extremely strong to cut, and you want a tapered blade so that way you're able to go around the corners. If you use a straight blade, you'll have a very difficult time making the arc cut that's necessary for these pipes. You'll need a drill bit, at least a 1/2 inch diameter. Cordless recommended, at least a 20 volt. If you're going to use any cordless tools, it has to be a 20 volt. Otherwise, if you use a 14 volt or an 18 volt, you'll go through a lot of batteries, and they don't have the torque like the 20 volt does. If you're getting into the side where you're only using a small diameter pipe and you can buy a hole saw, this is the recommended way of cutting it. But if your pipe diameter is large enough where you cannot find a hole saw, then you're going to have to do it in the manner in which I'm going to show you next. Determine the diameter of pipe that you're going to use for your connecting ports. The majority of all of our systems, the standard 80 to 90% of the connecting pipe diameters that we're using is 12-inch SDR 35 PVC pipe, and that's going to be the same in this case. So determine that, get your marker out, and determine where that cut guide is on the chamber. So in this one, it's the second ring in. Now the big issue that majority of people have is when they start to draw the lines, they want to continue the circle in this fashion. You can't, because once you get to this corner on either side of the center rib, when the pipe is coming in on a horizontal, this point has to come out horizontal. So it's got to be parallel to the ground or into the angle of the pipe coming into the side connectors. So as you can see, I'm drawing it parallel with the floor or the ground and in the way that the pipe is going to be coming in. If you draw this arch all the way up, if you continue it up here, you're going to have a major gap between the chamber and the pipe. Once you've drawn the horizontal lines that are parallel to the floor, ground, or the way the pipe is coming in from the distribution rows, and you get to the edges of the rib, now this is where you draw the arch for the pipe. So at this point, now you have your template and you have it drawn right onto the actual chamber, at which point now you then take your drill bit and at every single intersection plug a hole, just as I'll demonstrate now. Now that the holes are plugged into the side of the chamber, it allows you now to get your Sawzall blade in there, make the cuts, and then it doesn't bind in the corners, which is absolutely necessary. Once again, I'm using a 20 volt cordless reciprocating saw with a bimetal taper blade. As you can see, my very first cut is a horizontal, a parallel cut with the ground, floor, or the pipe connections, at which time now I'm going to use the tip of the blade to be able to go around and cut my part. So once again, now that I come down to the intersection point, my next cut on any side of the rib has to be parallel with the way the pipe is coming into the system. Now once I took my time cutting the very first one, now this becomes my template. So I'll make sure I mark the top and the bottom of the actual template, so when I go to the next chamber, I can plug it right where it needs to go, and with my marker I'm able to use it as a template to get my marks for the next cut. One of the nice little features that you can that I recommend is if you get a cordless grinder, because there's a lot of times out in the field you're going to have deviations of the base stone, and sometimes your cuts aren't going to be exact. And instead of trying to whittle away a real thin section on the chamber with a sawzall, things jump around and it's not really that conducive to getting a good cut. So if you have a little grinder and you got a high spot on the chamber, it's a lot easier to use this to hit any high spots or areas that will impede the pipe from going into the system. So it's not necessary that you have to have this, but it's a nice little feature to have just in case you need to take a high spot off of the chamber. So when the product gets delivered to the site, obviously they'll be on pallets. So to be able to give yourself a good platform to cut the end caps, all we did is we just basically removed the slats out of the pallet, and that way when we set the end cap down, you got a nice table to be able to cut and keep that end cap nice and flat. All right, so now it comes time to cut the end cap. Once again, in this demonstration, we're going to use 12-inch SDR35 PVC pipe. So the first end cap, we cut it out, and this becomes our template. We laid it over the end cap. Once we determined where our invert is going to be coming from the chamber into the end cap, and what we did here is you can see where you have the center rib here, you have the cut guides, and this one obviously represents the diameter of pipe that we're using in this demonstration. And we took and we drilled holes wherever there was a transition from a flat surface to a vertical surface. So again, we used a 1/2-inch pilot tipped drill bit. If you're going to be cutting several holes, I'd recommend you get at least 2 or 3 of these drill bits. The material is extremely strong and tough, and the same thing with the sawzall blades. If you have many holes to cut, I'd recommend making sure that you at least have 5 or 6 sawzall blades at your disposal.